Welcome to Wyoming's Health Watch. I'm attorney Jason Oakes, and here you'll learn the most up-to-date information about dangerous drugs, dangerous products, and safety news with hopes that it just might prevent a catastrophe. Let's get started.
Hello, thanks for joining me. Today I wanted to get back to vaping. We've had quite a few callers and also people who've inquired on WyomingHealthWatch.com about whether or not vaping provides any sort of risk to people who are smelling or inhaling it secondhand. And I think it's a very good question. It's one that's been inquired not only by parents but also younger individuals who have sent me emails on WyomingHealthWatch.com, and I myself initially did not know the answer to this. So we set out to figure out if there is some sort of risk with respect to secondhand inhalation of vaping. And I particularly was interested in this because vaping has been a huge issue in our middle schools and high schools across the country. The most recent statistics have 1 out of 3 high schoolers who have vaped, 1 out of 9 middle schoolers who have vaped, and many who vape over and over again, and even additional middle schoolers and high schoolers who have become addicted. So the question was very fair in the sense that 2/3 of high schoolers from the statistics do not vape, and certainly 8 out of 9 middle schoolers don't vape, but they're no doubt being potentially exposed to the vape foam, if you will. I call it foam because it's thick when you see people exhale the vape from their mouth after inhaling it. It's very thick smoke, and if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. The photo, and you can go online and just search vape smoke or vape exhalation. You see these really intense photos of people exhaling, and the exhale is almost so thick in many cases you can't even see a person's face. So is that exhalation, if you will, is that vapor, is it dangerous to those who have chosen that they do not want to vape, that they do not want to be exposed to this, and if anything, they want to do whatever they can to protect their lungs and their health from this sort of potential danger? So we set out to figure out what, if anything, was out there, knowing full well this is brand new, and there's still a lot of information that is still unknown with respect to vaping, and there's also a lot of data and scientific studies that need to be done. But what's been out there so far, and how can we at this point provide valuable information to those who want to avoid inhaling secondhand vape? The most recent studies I could find, there was a 2014 study and then another study from 2018 that caught my attention. There was an initial study in 2014, and keep in mind that e-cigarettes have been fairly new. I mean, they really hit the market about 2011, and they were frankly not very popular until 2015. And 2015 is an important year because that marked when Juul entered the market with their brand new vaping device that I've seen referred to online as the iPhones of vaping. And it's that real sleek kind of black device that you've seen. It's not very long. It's only about 2.5 inches long, easy to conceal, and it can charge very quickly plugging into your USB port on your computer. So we start seeing a huge increase of vaping about 2015. So the study in 2014 we would call it an older study, but only because the trend has been so enormous within the past 4 years of e-cigarettes and vaping. But the 2014 study was nonetheless an informative study. It was published in the International Journal of Hygiene and Environmental Health. And the conclusion of the authors was that the use of electronic cigarettes does impair indoor air quality. In fact, it increases the air quality with a whole host of pollutants that could be harmful to the health of the secondhand inhalers. Specifically, I want to quote from their study, and I found it very informative. Quote, "Our data confirms that e-cigarettes are not emission-free, and their pollutants could be of health concern for users and secondhand smokers. In particular, ultrafine particles informed from the supersaturated vapor can be deposited in the lung, and aerosolized nicotine seems capable of increasing the release of the inflammatory signal molecule NO upon inhalation. So, number one, the ultrafine particles that they found can and are in the air of a vape exhalation can be deposited in the lung. That is a frightening thing, because if you're like me, you've been walking down the street and you've had somebody vape in front of you and it comes right back into your face, or I've even been at a stop sign or a stoplight and somebody in front of me, in the car in front of me, vapes and plumes it out, and I'm sitting there rolling my windows up as fast as possible. The concluding remark in this particular 2014 study states that, in quote, in view of consumer safety, e-cigarettes and nicotine liquids should be officially regulated and labeled with appropriate warnings of potential health effects, particularly of toxicity risk in children. And I will tell you that today, and you can go on WyomingHealthWatch.com and see some of my videos. We open up a Juul starter pack for parents who are not familiar. Go on there; it's a real informative video. But at that time, I had purchased a Juul starter kit, and I noticed, and we talked about it on the video, how there's warnings about nicotine being affixed to the outside boxes or box, and warning that it is an addictive chemical. That warning did not and was not required by the FDA until late 2017. And you'll recall that I mentioned that Juul hit the market in 2015. So there was a period of 15, 16, and a good chunk of 17 where these were completely unregulated. There were not any requirements for any sort of warnings on any of these devices until much later. And so children who enjoyed the flavor pods, the peppermint pods, and I've talked about this on my videos, I mean, they smell really nice. You would never think, if you smelled one of these pods, or if you smelled somebody who just smoked one of these pods, you never think in a million years that they had done vaping or something that would potentially harm and destroy lung tissue. In any event, children who are middle schoolers, high schoolers, and 15, 16, 17, they're getting hooked on these pods that are tasty, that are smooth to the throat and mouth, having no idea that the nicotine levels are tremendous, having no idea that nicotine is more addictive than methamphetamine. And I've said this in the past, and I'll say it again. I wonder, why don't we require that warning on the Juul packs and on these e-cig packs, that nicotine is more addictive than methamphetamine? Then maybe we can educate these young youth to stay away from these otherwise what they believe to be harmless devices, and they are not anywhere from harmless. So moving back to the secondhand inhalation topic today, we found a second study. It was a 2018 study. It was published in the Science News publication. The title is "Exposure to Secondhand E-Cigarettes Increasing Among Young People." And it was a study that gathered a whole host of data from 2018, 2017, and 2016. And it was actually published just recently, August 28th of 2019. Excuse me, I think earlier I said 2018, but this is a relatively new published article that I think is very informative. Let me share with you a couple sections of it that I found very informative. There was a survey, so there is some criticism that's already out there that, you know, surveys are based on people's recollection and may not pose as accurate, but nonetheless, it is still information. It's still something that we see studies in a whole host of different areas rely upon, and also come to certain conclusions. But let me quote one of the areas that I felt was particularly concerning. Quote, "Fumes from e-cigarettes contain a variety of chemicals, including nicotine, heavy metals, aldehydes, glycerin, and flavoring substances. The majority of studies have concluded that passive exposure may pose a health risk to bystanders, particularly vulnerable populations such as children and teens. So this is no laughing matter when it comes to our youth who are trying their best to avoid what is becoming the kind of in-crowd, cool crowd thing to do. I have to admire any young high schooler or even potentially middle schooler who, maybe an athlete, maybe somebody who has no interest in getting involved in this, who may just want to focus on their studies and not be bothered, and sure as heck not want to risk any sort of permanent damage, and yet potentially may be putting themselves at risk by even being around a group of people who are vaping regularly. So the question is how to avoid it, and how to avoid it is pretty simple, but simple for me, simple for you if you're listening as a parent, because sometimes we forget what it's like to be a 16 and 17-year-old. I was talking with a friend not too long ago, and we were just talking about the peer pressures that we could recall at 16 and 17, and I remembered, and we laughed about it, not because it's a laughing matter, vaping, but because it was a totally different time. Whereas when I was 16 and 17, if you wanted to be in the cool crowd, you wore an Atlanta Falcons jersey. And I mentioned I laughed only because that, nobody was going to hurt their lungs by being involved with the Atlanta Falcons. However, today, now, if you want to be cool, if you want to be in the in crowd, you're smoking these devices that most people, including parents, including school officials, have no idea. They're creating havoc on lungs. And beyond that, we don't even know at this point. There's a rush to do as much scientific research as possible to understand the full extent of the damage that these things may do. But right now, that verdict is still out. But what we do know is that as of today, there were over 3,000 reported lung injuries to the CDC. There's been a new lung condition that's evolved and emerged in the medical literature called EVALI. That's an acronym. EV is in Victor, ALI. It stands for e-cigarette vape lung injury. So we have a new injury and a new medical condition that's been linked to this. And as of this morning, there were over 50 vaping deaths that this has been reported to the CDC. And up until about 2 weeks ago, this had been reported in all but one state. So the only state that it hadn't been reported in was Alaska. However, just within the last 2 weeks, Alaska has had their first case, and now all 50 states have been infected by this. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I hope this provides some value. The bottom line is that there's still a lot of uncertainty regarding what damage can be done from secondhand inhalation of vape exhale. But the bottom line is that they have concluded that heavy metals and all sorts of gunk contaminates the air once exhalation of vaping vapor hits the air, and can further not only cause havoc but also damage to lungs, and that the most susceptible group is teens and children. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to look at any of our videos or listen to any of our other podcasts, please go to WyomingHealthWatch.com, or you can simply search Wyoming Health Watch on Spotify and Apple iTunes. Have a great day.